Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Order, arms, center, base, forward, march.
We're in for a real treat. We're going to hear from a remarkable leader with impeccable integrity, a man who has and continues to put his mind and heart into all he does and stands for. And he has these really amazing prayers that we'll share here. He's a man he's not only a strong man, he's a humble man. And his personal prayer since high school has been, thank you for today, forgive me for yesterday, guide, guard, and deliver me tomorrow. My friends, we are honored to have Keith Bishop here to present. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. It truly is an honor. And thank you, Drew. And thank you, Sparky. And thank you, Brad. And thank you, Henry, for exposing me to the center. And anyway, figuring out after I was asked to speak, and I used to do speaking years back. And as we go through, I'm in my third career now, and I haven't done speaking in quite a while. So in trying to stay on mark with what's going on here, I kind of put my life story and how I wound up standing here in front of you all now and what all went on. I grew up in Midland, Texas, which is West Texas, Permian Basin. It's God's country, but you got to be from there to appreciate it. And it is the home of a lot of the Friday Night Lights, the football that they made a book and made the movie about. Well, in that movie, any of you are familiar with it, the bad guys in the movie is Midland Lee, and that's where I went to school. And we were the bad guys. And we were the bad guys, but the good guys. And they have since changed the name of my high school it was Robert E. Lee High School. And for the correctness, they changed it to something high school or something. So I haven't been back since. But it's, that's where I was from. But anyway, I was an adopted kid. My parents adopted me as I was a couple of weeks old, and in San Diego, La Jolla, California. And it was a prearranged deal that my birth mother, who I didn't meet till later when I was an adult. In fact, I was playing with the Broncos. And a prearranged deal, and I thank God that George and Wanda Bishop adopted me. And so we lived there for a little bit, and then my dad, they moved to Midland, and that's where I was raised after a couple of months old. And that's where I basically got my upbringing and my background from, was being raised in Midland. My dad was, he was a Connecticut Yankee, the family lived in Bristol, Connecticut area, and the father, my grandfather, moved the family all the way across the United States to San Diego. Mission Bay area, they basically homesteaded the Mission Bay area, I don't know, 100 years ago, whatever it was, and built homes there when there was nothing there and all that kind of stuff. And so my father went to San Diego State College. It wasn't the university then, and he was studying engineering and tool design, and he was also in art. And my dad was an unbelievable artist and didn't sell anything, but Walt Disney just started a new company, came down to the art class in San Diego and looked around, and he offered my father a job as a cartoonist, and my father turned him down, and the rest is history. But then my mom, she was a East Texas redneck farm girl, and when I say redneck, it's not in any type of racial term. She was a poor farm girl with a redneck from work, and she grew up in East Texas. How my mother and father met, I don't remember, but thank goodness they did. And my mom was very hands-on and strict as far as my upbringing. And so anyway, I grew up in Midland, and my dad was a architect, had a small construction company and a home builder in Midland. My mom sold real estate, and both parents, as I grew up, were full-time working. And I and my little sister, younger sister, we grew up and we had a home cleaner nanny, Lita Hernandez, who basically raised me and my sister during the day as my mom was working. So it's full-time Lita, and that's where I got a lot of my appreciation for Mexican food and for the Hispanic culture. And when my parents passed away, which I'll get into later, in '86 while I was playing at the gravesite, Lita and Johnny Hernandez sat next to me at both funerals, which were 2 months apart. But get into what I want to talk about for you young people in the back. It's kind of directed to you guys. Things happen as you're going through life, and windows open and windows close, and knowing when, or having the luck to know when to go through that window and before it shuts is where I've been very fortunate in my life. And so anyway, getting back to it, I grew up, and I'm a bit of a troublemaker, not mean, but just rambunctious. And I know that my mom told me many times that, because I got spankings every Sunday at church. And I can remember hanging from an arm. Honest goodness, I can remember hanging from my arm, my mom whipping me outside the church doors. And then she told me when I was a little bit older that she went to the doctor. I'm beating my kid all the time, you know. And he goes, just beat him harder. And she always laughed about that. But I wasn't a bad kid, they told me. It was just I got in trouble. I'd tell the preacher, shut up, and during sermon, and if it's too long, or that's enough during the prayer because the prayer was too long, and everybody, oh, there's Keith again, you know. And so anyway, I grew up in church, and Church of Christ, and Holy Rollers, and but I mean it was all good. So anyway, I go through, and I was very blessed for athletics, and so baseball and football were my two sports. And so I'm playing baseball, and I was probably a little bit better in baseball than I was in football. And but I was, I think, fifth, sixth grade, and we were out having a clod fight. And for any of you guys that ever had clod fights, and I rose up over the dirt mound to throw my clod, and I got hit in the left eye by a hard clod, and basically it screwed my left eye up. I didn't know it at the time, but over years, I got very bad astigmatism and my depth perception pretty much went away. I could wear glasses, and then I kind of drifted towards football. And in high school, I had a coach, James Akery, who was a Texas legend in high school football. Obviously, he's since long passed, but he was a no mess around guy, and I was still a little rambunctious. And we were out as my sophomore year, and we were out during the off season, and we were doing exercises and sprints, and I kind of had gotten fed up with it. And one of our assistant coaches was running the sprints on our side of the front, and Coach Akery was over on the other side of the field, just running the whole field. And I said, this is BS, but I used explicative. And Coach Akery heard it, and he goes, "Who said that?" And Coach Donnie Dimbo, who was one of his players when he coached him in East Texas at Corsicana, said, "Keith, get back in line and shut up." And so I didn't say anything, and he stopped the whole drill. He goes, "Who said it?" And then Coach Dimbo said, and I said, I did, Coach. And he was like, "Run his out of here." And Coach Dimbo said, "Keith, stay in line, shut up." And he goes, "Coach, we're good." And that would have ended my football career right there. But Coach Dimbo stepped in. I kept my mouth shut and finished the running. And doesn't seem like a lot, but it could have been very noteworthy as far as my future life. And I learned a little thing there, is to keep your mouth shut at certain times. So, you young people, there's certain times, if it hits you, keep your mouth shut. And it may help keep you out of trouble. And so anyway, my relationship with Coach Akery just developed and developed. And he really was a Texas legend in high school football. And I was a team captain, and I was highly recruited. I made all the different teams, the all states, and the Texas Monthly, all that kind of stuff my senior year, and I was recruited all over the country. But during my senior season, I got kicked in the foot during practice, and I broke my little toe. And back then, you just stay off of it for a couple of weeks, and then it'll heal. But I missed a game. So a lot of the schools, and it was all over the country, I was being recruited. And a lot of the schools stopped talking to me. But Nebraska kept talking to me, and the coach was Jerry Moore, he was the offensive coordinator or whatever for Nebraska. Tom Osborne was the head coach. But Jerry Moore had played for my coach, Jim Akery, in Bonham, Texas. And Jerry kept recruiting me the whole time. And we're only talking 2 weeks. But a lot of the other schools quit for like a week or so. And I wrote every one of those schools off. Well, and Texas kept recruiting me. And so Spike Dykes was a recruiter then, and he became well known at Texas Tech later on. And in fact, he even coached at my high school. I think won a state championship at my high school middle. And Spike was a recruiter, so I committed to go to Texas. And Darrell Royal was the head coach. But I had already told Baylor that I would visit, and my old high school offensive line coach, which gave me number 54 back in high school, which I carried through till I finished playing with the Broncos. He was the offensive line coach at Baylor. And so I had told him I'd go and for a visit. And then I told Coach O'Hara, I committed to Texas. And he goes, "Yeah, that's fine." He goes, "Still, just come visit," and we agreed. I go, "Okay." So Coach Royal gets wind of it, and he calls me, and he's getting on me pretty good about, all the kids that they've turned down for scholarship because they promised me a scholarship, and I'm going to go visit Baylor. And I said, "Coach, I'm coming to Nebraska. I'm coming to Texas." And I went through the Coach O'Hara and all that. And I finally wound up, and I go, "Coach Royal, you keep my scholarship. And I hung up. And then it was like, oh, you can't tell Darrell Royal to keep a scholarship. So it was a little bit of value there that I'd given my word, and I kept my word. So that's all that. And I wasn't disrespectful. I said, Coach Royal, please, you just keep my scholarship. And I didn't go to Baylor either. I went to Nebraska because of Jerry Moore. So I go to Nebraska. And I'm at Nebraska, and I'm the Texas kid that was highly recruited and all this kind of stuff. And they put me on the varsity my freshman year for a couple of games, and then they moved me back down to a freshman team. And you have to deal with jealousies and envy and playing your cards right when you're dealing with all this competition and people treating you in different manners. But anyway, I played the freshman team that full season. And then the next year, it was I was on the varsity and played some. We had a offensive center that was an All-American that was playing, and so I got to play some. Then that the spring game, it was whoever graded out best between me and another player, Tom Davis, who was later a teammate when I was back here at Denver. Whoever did the best in spring practices and spring game would be the starting center for the following season. And I had a phenomenal spring, and it was a phenomenal spring game. And then I went in for the coaches to go through the grades, and all the offensive linemen were all in the coaching room with Cletus Fisher, who was the offensive line coach then. And he grades Tom above me, which was not accurate, especially as far as I was concerned. And I got up and I walked out, and I said, I'm done. In the meantime, when all this was going on, my mother had come down with cancer, and she had had cancer years back before I was aware, and my parents had never told me that she had cancer. That's the reason she couldn't have children, and that's the reason I got adopted. But anyway, so she was sick with cancer, and she was doing well, but it was back in the 70s, and, cancer, it's not quite like it is now, a little bit better odds. But anyway, so I was like, I'm going home. And all the players, there's Rick Bonas and Vince Ferragamo, Terry Luck, Tony Davis, if any of y'all are Nebraska, they were all the guys that were around at that time, and they're telling me, Keith, you got tooled, you got to go. And so it was like, all right. And I told Coach Osborne, I'm going to leave. And he goes, well, come meet with me, before you leave, and then we'll talk about it and you make your decision. So I go up on a Saturday to meet Coach Osborne, and he doesn't show up. So I'm gone. And I drive home, tell my parents, that I quit, and I'm going to build houses with my dad. And my football career is over. And my parents both look at me and they go, don't be stupid. You can get your college paid for. Play football. Don't quit. And so I called Baylor, and I'm speeding things up, but it may not seem like it, but I am. And I called Baylor, who had recruited me very heavily, and said, hey, I quit Nebraska. Can I walk? And they go, absolutely, come on. And so Baylor accepts me. I go to Baylor. I have to sit out a year for redshirt for transferring. And then I play the next year. I practice. I was on what you call the practice squad for a year. And then the next season I was just starting center, and I played that year. And then going into my senior year, my then wife, my ex-wife, her boyfriend played with it was Lamar. It was out of Beaumont, but school. We played them in our first non-conference game of the year. I was playing against my ex-wife's boyfriend in high school, and I blew my knee out in the first game of my senior year. And so I missed, this is my wife's boyfriend, and he wasn't that good. And I blew my knee out. So I played 1 year in college is what it boiled down to. And then I missed that whole season. And then we played in the Peach Bowl that year. I can't remember what, it was 79 Peach Bowl. And we played Clemson, and I got to play in that bowl game. And thank goodness, we had great trainers, Skip Cox at Baylor, and they got me well because I blew my knee completely out. And I played, had a good game, and I wound up getting drafted by the Broncos in the 6th round in 1980. And then that was my rookie year. And so I come up, and I'm a 6th round draft choice. And Whitey Duvall, who another coach that had a huge influence in my life, and whether it's a coach or your teacher or your parent or an associate or whatever you're going to have, you young guys, girls, you're going to have people that come into your life, and you're not going to realize their impact till years later. And so anyway, Whitey Duvall, who is one of the best offensive line coaches in the history of the NFL line coaches, he is the line coach for the Broncos. And he's the one that picked me. He came down to Baylor and worked me out and all that kind of stuff. And so he's the reason I got picked by Baylor. By the Broncos. So I come up, Red Miller's the head coach, and I have a great camp, and I wind up making the team. And then I play a ton my first season as a rookie. And after the season, Whitey tells me, he goes, he called me kid. And Whitey's since passed, so, may he rest in peace. But Whitey said, kid, he goes, I should have started you. He goes, but I won't start rookies. And so it was a huge compliment, and, I'll never forget that. But anyway, he had such an influence on my techniques as offensive lineman in the pro sport and how to watch film, what to look for in your defense. And just like any other kind of study, anything you're studying, it's seeing what you're seeing and putting that into how you can respond. And so went through all that, and then the team is sold. And Edgar Kaiser comes in, and he fires Red, and he hires Dan Reeves. And Dan wants to keep Whitey, but Whitey's loyal to Red, so they both come from the Patriots. And so Whitey made Dan fire him. And he basically told Dan, he goes, we ain't doing that up and down stuff that the Cowboys do. Just get down, okay, you're going. And so Whitey had 2 more years on his contract, and coaches' contracts were guaranteed. So Whitey was taken care of, but Whitey's gone. So that's another big turning point in my careers and my success as a young adult was my success in football and what Whitey Duvall taught me. Going to my next year, and I'm projected the starter, and first preseason game, I blow a tendon out in my foot and pulling on a sweep, and my season's done. It's a peroneus tendon, which makes your foot pronate and does everything. And so I was done. I missed that season. The coach that they bring in was a great guy, but he didn't know a lot about offensive line. And so I struggle with him, and I play, and I'm one of the team captains. And he stays for a couple of years, and then in 1983, Elway's first year, they hired Dan Radakovich, who was you look him up. He was bad rat. And he put the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line together. He put the LA Rams offensive line together back in those days, the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And he was our new offensive line coach. So that was my second pro coach, individual position coach that was phenomenal. techniques, everything else was unbelievable, but he made Dan fire him after 1 year. And then Alex Gibbs comes in and takes over as offensive line coach. He was a defensive back coach from the University of Georgia. So he became renowned as an offensive line guru, but that was years after I was gone, because he didn't have a clue when we were playing in the mid-'80s. And we were going to all the Super Bowls and everything. We didn't win, but we went to 3. And so anyway, I finished out my career, and towards the 3rd year of me playing, it was 4th year, because it was when Pat Bolin bought the team from Mr. Kaiser. Pat brought in DPD guys, some Metro guys, which is their SWAT, for our security, and they traveled with the team, and I befriended all 5 of them. And I'm not going to name them, but anyway, I became friends with these Denver cops that were our security. And they said, why don't you come out and ride with us one of these nights when you got the next day off? So Monday nights, Tuesdays were our normal day off. And so I would go ride with the Denver Metro guys on Monday nights. And it's almost every Monday night during the season. And I'd ride with them, and I saw, as Henry could explain, all kinds of stuff. And saw them handling the different people. And so those life experiences, being with the Denver guys, and I'd go into their headquarters that was off. It was a separate building from the regular PD buildings and everything. And I'd go out and go to the lake with them. And anyway, we were friends. And I got my exposure to law enforcement, firsthand exposure to law enforcement, through this friendship with the Denver Metro guys, who were our security guys. So I was going along, and back in the old days, the Broncos, you had to do 3 charity appearances a year where you weren't compensated, and it was for, it was for the community. And it was, you just go and make an appearance. It was junior high sports banquet or high school sports banquet or whatever the case may be. And you couldn't be compensated. You could do other stuff and be paid for, but you had to do 3 charity things. But if you could get somebody else to do your charity appearance for it, then you would still get credit for it. And I like talking to kids. And so I was going around talking to a bunch of kids, and all my teammates were coming, hey, Bish, will you speak at this thing for me and speak at that thing for me? And so I was, yeah. And, but I'd take one of the Denver cops with me, and I'd talk about football, and then I'd let the officer talk about, drugs and trouble and gangs and all that. And then if they were going to pay me, because some people wouldn't take no, I have to do this, pro bono, you can't pay me. And they, no, we're going to give it to the officer. And so, we're talking $100, $200. It wasn't anything outrageous like it is now. But so I did that for the next several years while I was playing. Then DEA gets wind of this. And so they asked me to go travel to Aspen to talk to Aspen High School at their spring banquet or whichever it was. So I would go out to Aspen. This might have been close to my last year. But I go to Aspen and I speak at their high school banquet. And this just beautiful high school senior girl comes up after I got through speaking. And I had my young son, who was a year and a half old, 2.5 years old, there with me, and I'm holding him. And she comes up and she goes, you really ought to be talking to our parents instead of us. And, about the drugs and other stuff. And that just kind of resonated with me, that people are always dealing with all these different pressures. And you don't know what someone's going through. And it's quite humbling. So fast forward, and I'm in my last year with the Broncos. I didn't know it then, but it was, I was in my last year with the Broncos. And as I said, DEA had asked me. Well, the reason that DEA asked me was an agent named Ron Hollingshead, who was in the Denver office for years. He was their recruiter and their demand reduction guy. And he would come over to the Broncos headquarters when we were up off 58th, and we'd give him, Bronco memorabilia, and he'd do for his little presentations when he'd go to schools and stuff. But anyway, Ron and I became quasi-friends. And my last year, I was sitting I'd gone to the Emerald Isle, which is a restaurant bar over off Parker Road. And I was in, and we'd sit around and have some beers and talk. It was a wings kind of beer place. But I was by myself. And Ron comes in the door, because I guess he liked Emerald Isle as well. And it's still open. And Ron comes in, sees me, he walks over, and can I join you? I go, sure. So we're sitting, sipping beers, talking, and the subject gets to, what are you going to do when you finish playing? And I go, well, I may go into coaching. I've thought a little bit about law enforcement, and, I don't know. And he pulls out his badge, and which I think is a really cool badge, and DEA badge. And he slams it down on the desk or the table, and he says, have you ever thought about coming working DEA? And I go, interesting. I go, I hadn't, but he goes, well, you have to have a college degree. And I go, well, I don't have my college degree. I was 12 hours short when I left, to come play professional football. Now it's 10 years later. And he goes, get your degree and come to work for us. But he goes, you better hurry because, the age cutoff is 35. And so that, boom, it's in my head. Now going back 3 years, in 1986, both my parents came down with cancer. And my mother had it. My father, it was just like out of nowhere. And I attribute some of that to the meddling in the water table being so screwed up and speculative. But anyway, both my parents died in 86, in April 2nd and June 11th. And that was hard. And Elway and my ex-wife, they helped me through that horrendous time. And you're feeling all alone when you lose both your parents, especially when you're 20-something years old. I was 28, 29 years old. And we knew my mom had been sick on and off, but my dad was like really good health, and all his family had lived for years and years and years. And he came down with a brain cancer that was like, no ifs, ands, or buts, you're not surviving. And so anyway, held my dad as he passed, and then I was up in Denver, and my ex-wife was in Midland with my mom, and she passed. And got through that, and that more or less kind of changed my life. Because I'd always, like I said, I was adopted. And it drove me crazy that I wasn't blood relations to my parents that raised me. And I was kind of an introvert, if that's the right word. I've always been kind of a loner because of that, because I didn't want anyone to know back when I was young, and that I was adopted and they weren't my parents. And so I've always been a quasi-loner, not a mean loner. I like being around people, but if I got my druthers, I'll just be about myself or be with my wife or be with my dogs, and I'm good. So anyway, boom, have you ever thought of possibly being DEA? So there was a bit of a struggle, and I'm not going to badmouth anybody. So my last season, I'm done. And I'm like, it's right up. We play in the Super Bowl against the 49ers in New Orleans my last year. That's my last game. And I'm in a backup position. I had gotten injured earlier in the year. And missed like 2 games, and I had spinal, not meningitis, it's spinal, the other one, that's not bacterial, it's from injury, and you get swelling. And so I was in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. And so I missed 2 games. And then they took me away from starting, and that was what you didn't do. And so I was angry, and I'm going to leave it at that. And so, boom, it's coming down to, I know it's going to be the last game. We're going to Super Bowl. And the guy that's producing the Super Bowl, and I can't remember what channel or station it was back then, but it was Alan Stone, and he was one of my fraternity brothers at Baylor. Now he was a big producer for the network. And he was like, Keith, he goes, everybody's talking about you're not playing. What's the story? And I go, Alan, I can't say anything. Because I was the team captain, and I wasn't going to tear the team up, and not for personal reasons. So I kept my mouth shut. And I kept my mouth shut the whole time. Even after I left, I kept my mouth shut. And so season comes to an end. We get killed in the Super Bowl. And I'm supposed to, everybody, all players, once the season ends, you go and you talk to the head coach. And he kind of gives you his perspective on what's going to be going on with your career for going forward. And you did a great job or you didn't do it. So anyway, it was my time for a meeting with Coach Reeves, and he can't meet. And it wasn't just me. He pushed everybody a couple hours later in the afternoon to do their meetings. You're on a schedule. And I was like, well, I'm done. So I just left, said goodbye to Greek, Steve Antonopoulos, and I head to the house, pack up, boom, I'm on the road. And one of my Denver PD Metro guys was in the second car with all my belongings, and we were headed to Waco because Baylor had already pulled up all my classes I needed to graduate, to get my degree and in education, and a BS in education. And so I was on my way. Sale sign was up in the yard. No forwarding address, no nothing, no contact information to the Broncos. They had my electronic deposit information because I had started deferring my salary years before. And I'd defer it like, $40,000 for this year. And then the next year it'd be $40,000, next year it'd be $40,000. My final 2 years, I was the highest paid offensive lineman in the league. So I was making, back then, I was making a lot of money. And I deferred all of it because you only need so much. And so I had deferred payments close to $100,000 a year for the next 11 years following my retiring from football. And so, boom, we're gone. And I go back to Baylor to finish my degree. I got 27 hours, credit hours, that I got to complete. It was 12, but after 10 years, it was 27. So they get me in the first session of summer school. I do 18 hours. The spring semester, I do 18 hours. And then the first session of summer school, I do 9 hours. And boom, I'm graduate. This is for you young guys and girls. And there's Splash. I sat in the front of the class. This is when I went back. I'm 33 years old. Sat in the front of the class, took copious notes, paid attention, never missed a class. And I made almost straight A's in all the hardest classes for my degree that I had to take because I pushed everything hard off. And so take that as a hint. Just apply yourself while you're in class, and gosh, it makes things easy. And so anyway, graduate. And then I was helping coach at Baylor. Grant Taft was the head coach. He was my coach back when I played in college. And he wanted me to come on drawing a blank on the coaching staff right away. And I was like, no, coach. He goes, I'm volunteering. I don't want you to pay me. I got to sift through this. I was an emotional departure from play. So my agent, who was Bob Warren, who's an attorney, and I'm sure he's retired now, but he was a phenomenal, straight up good attorney that I made. Two of my teammates, Keith Karch and Simon Fletcher, I made them both get rid of their agents and go with Bob. And both of those guys thank me to the day that I made them go with Bob, because Bob charged by the hour instead of a percentage of your salary. And so Bob calls me after I'm going. And no, they know I'm in Baylor, but nobody can talk with me. And Bob calls me and says, Al Davis with the Raiders and Bobby Beathard with the Chargers, who was a GM, both of them want you to come play for their teams. And I told Bob, I go, Bob, please respectfully decline both the offers. I'm done with football. And for you young guys, that's one of these windows open, windows shut. And one of the determining factors on my future life was turning that down and making the break from football to real life. And that's where DEA comes in. And so I do all that in the interaction with the DEA at different things. I'm finishing up one of the classes, psychology class I had was juvenile delinquency. And Baylor is, I didn't know it, but they've got a phenomenal psychology department. And one of the professors that wrote, well, he was the, what do you call it, the head of the psychology department. He wrote the book on juvenile delinquency on the class I was taking. And I asked if I could call DEA and have them come talk about, drugs and addiction and stuff. So I called Hollingshead in Denver. He got me in touch with Dromgoole, who was the recruiter in Dallas, close to Waco. And Mike Dromgoole came down and spoke to the class. And then after class, I took Mike over to the IHOP, and we sat around and talked for 3 hours. And he then again put the pitch on about coming for DEA. I still hadn't made my mind up. But I was 33 years old, and I turned 33 right after retiring from the Broncos. So I was already 33 when I graduated from Baylor. And 35 was the cutoff for being hired into the government. Because you had to be, 55 was the retirement age, you had to have that 20-year block. So, boom, I was under the gun. So he hit me up like, put in, I'll help you and everything. So I put in, and you get a physical, and then they do your background. And DEA's background was very extensive because of drugs, and obviously. And so it takes 9 months to do my background, which I don't think it should have taken that long. Because, I'd been in Denver for 10 years. It's like there's no real secrets, And then I'd been in Waco for a year and a half. And, but they went back, and they go back like 15 years. So anyway, they get it. That comes back. So everything's good to go. I go, and you have a physical right before you go off to Quantico. And Bureau does it, all the federal agencies, the law enforcement agency. You have a physical that you got to pass. It's a minimal test, and then the background's finished, and then there's like a 2-week window that you're supposed to go to Quantico, and like all of a sudden it's just crickets. And Mike Dromgoole got promoted, and he was now the RAC in Laredo, Texas, and a new guy had taken over as recruiter, and he could care less about. He was one of those government people. And God bless them, but some of them aren't real go-getters. And so everything comes to a screeching stop. And I'm approaching 35, which is, it don't matter if you're approved or not, you can't be hired. And so finally I get upset because I'm calling up to Dallas, and getting the runaround from the recruiter and his secretary. But I'd met the SAC on a previous trip up. And so I called up to his secretary. And I said, this is Keith. And, hi, Keith. And I go, can I have a schedule a meeting with Mr. Jordan. And she goes, sure. And she pulls out and she goes, yeah, come up. And so it's a couple days later. I drive up to Dallas from Waco, and I'm hot. And so I walk in the building. They let me in the building. They recognize me. And I go and I turn down the hall to go to the SAC's office. That's the special agent in charge. He's the head guy for the division. It was Phil Jordan. And I get down to his office, but I go past, and I'm not going to say the recruiter's name, but I go past his office, and he sees me. Whoa, 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 Keith. And he comes out in the hallway and goes, what are you doing? I go, I'm here to see Mr. Jordan. He goes, for what? And I go, see if I got a damn job or not. And so he goes, no, you don't have to. And I go on in the office, and his secretary's, Mr. Jordan's secretary's there. And she goes, hey, Keith. And she goes, Mr. Jordan's down at Denny's. He goes, he's waiting to see you. So going down there. All right, so I turn around. I walk out. And this is Dallas at Regal Row. It's over about close to Harry Hines and Love Field and all that. And the Denny's is right off 25 in Regal Row. It was. I haven't been there years. But anyway, I drive. I go into and Glenn's chasing me the whole time. Keith, you have to go. You have to go. And I walk into the Denny's, and I walk back, and he's in the back corner in the big booth. And, hey, Keith, how you doing? And Phil was a real sports guy. I mean, he liked the sports stuff. And how you doing? I go, not good. I go, Mr. Jordan, and I was respectful, but I was like, I'm here to find out if I'm going to get a damn job or not. And he goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I thought you were already hired. About that time, Glenn comes running up. I wasn't going to say his name. Glenn comes running up, and Phil turns to Glenn and says, what is going on? He goes, go back to the office, write a memo to headquarters that I fully support the hiring of Keith Bishop. And goes, yes, sir. So Glenn takes off, and then Mr. Jordan, he gets up right away. I go back. He goes, come back to the office, come to my office. And I go, yes, sir. I go back to the office. He goes through it. Glenn gets the memo written, brings it in. Mr. Jordan signs it, shows it to me. Wish I had a copy of it. And he goes, send that immediately to headquarters. That goes into headquarters, and it's a SAC recommending some yahoo, for hire. So boom, they immediately, and it says Broncos. So they immediately reach out to Denver, which the SAC back then was Phil Perry. Some of you law enforcement may remember Phil Perry as the SAC in Denver back in the 80s. He was another very influential DEA SAC. And he gets it. He goes, I 100% support Keith because I've done speaking for DEA. So now I got two SACs saying hire Keith. So 2 weeks later, I'm in Quantico. My class was BA 88, bless you, and I think BA 90 or 91, DEA went on a hiring freeze for like 3 years. And if that would have happened, I wouldn't have had a career in DEA. But what happens, I get approved, I'm in, I'm going to class, I go to class in January and of 92. January of 92. And it switches to a 57-year retirement. So I would have had a couple more years, but with that freeze, I still wouldn't have been DEA. And going back to football, I was very successful with the Broncos. I was the first offensive lineman, Denver Broncos offensive lineman, elected to the Pro Bowl. And the Pro Bowl back in those days was the only people that voted were the coaches and the players. It wasn't a popularity contest with the big markets and all that kind of stuff. It was players and coaches voted the Pro Bowl. So it was very meaningful. So 87, 88 years, it was the 86, 87 seasons, but Pro Bowls were during the next year. I was a starter at offensive guard, left guard, And then the next year, when I was hurt and missed half the season, I was the first alternate. So I had those, I was successful in football. I was more important to me was I was the team captain for 7 years of my time with the Broncos, and the friendships but once I went DEA, I lost high school friends. I lost old Bronco friends, and it's like, are you kidding me? It was because they smoked weed, and it was like I was the boogeyman because I was DEA now. And I mean, not invited to parties. And if there had been smoking dope, I would have left. But, things get weeded out, and oftentimes it's for the better. And so I'm DEA. And while I was waiting to get hired by DEA, I got my private pilot's license. I became a black belt in Muay Taekwondo, and my instructor, Kitak Kim, was a 7-time Korean champion of Muay Thai, the old style Korean karate, and all this stuff. So boom, I go traipsing into Quantico, and what everybody was under the impression was I was the big, rich, former NFL player, black player, who flew his Learjet to Quantico to go to school. So needless to say, I was a marked man. And because everybody thought it was a hobby. I was just, wanted to be cool. And I sincerely wanted to be a DEA agent. And one of the things my father told me when I was young was, if you're going to do something, do your best. And he really lit into me on that one. And I'd done some schoolwork, and then he looked at it, and I just half-tailed it. And that stuck with me. And then, what was the other? It was, you're young, you're going through all these questions and experiences. He goes, do whatever the hell you want to do. He goes, just don't do dope. And that stuck in my head. The other thing was, he goes, when I started playing pro, he goes, promise me that you'll get your degree. And that was the third thing, and I promised him I'd get my degree. So I was doing checkoffs that I had promised my dad, and he had passed, and I was going to live up to those things. One thing I think I failed to mention about my father was during World War II, he was one of General MacArthur's staff sergeants in GHQ, and he drew the bombardment plans for the Philippines and for Japan. And when General MacArthur passed, I know my dad got a letter from the family and all that kind of stuff. So my dad was very patriotic. My mother was very redneck patriotic. And I mean that in a loving manner, but they were both extremely, and that's the way I was brought up. And I'll leave that at that. It's just some insight into my upbringing. And but my dad was conservative, but he was fiscally conservative, politically conservative, libertarian. But it was his thing he said to me, and he didn't come up with this saying, but I'd heard it. But to him, he goes, son, your rights end where my nose begins. And that was kind of his perception on life and all that kind of stuff. And he instilled that in me. And my mom was a little more country, but it was all good. And like I said, as far as prejudices or being raised, it wasn't part of my home. It wasn't part of my upbringing. Lita and Johnny Hernandez, they sat at the gravesite with my parents' funerals with me. And my respect for them, being a football player from grade school to the NFL, the locker room was always mixed. And some of my dearest friends were of Black and Hispanic and some Asian as far as baseball. I met my birth mother. I never met my birth father. My birth mother reached out to me while I was in college, but there was no way I called my dad and he goes, yeah, she reached out and we gave her your address. And I go, that's when I was at Nebraska. And I'm not responding because I didn't want to hurt my mother that raised me. And my father was all fine with it, but I knew my mother wasn't. So after my parents passed, my birth mother had reached out to me again. This is when I was playing. And she lived in the Bay Area, and so I agreed to meet with her. And so I went and met with my birth mother. She was retired, but she was a big shot with IBM. And she was from a very wealthy Baltimore family. And reportedly, my birth father, who I never met, and I've never had the blood studies, whatever, but he was a very, according to my birth mother, a famous professional golfer, and I'm not going to name it because there's no proof. But anyway, supposedly I came from at least some athletic genes and some intelligent genes, but I've never confirmed that. And then the other part, as far as my love of Mexican food and respect for the Hispanic family, my birth grandmother, according to my birth mother, was 100% Cuban. So I've got whatever quarter Cuban in me that I haven't done the blood test. So anyway, that's a non-issue, but all these different things mean different things. But in finishing up, because I know there's I'm going to open it up to questions. And so I go, there's still more to the story. How much time do I got? Because I don't want to be putting people to sleep, but.
Really about ready for questions.
Okay. So fast forward, I'm DEA. I'm DEA in Dallas for 8.5 years. I go to headquarters to our Special Operations Division, which coordinates all the international investigations. I do that for 3 years. I go out of DC to Houston for 5 years. We do the Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, intercept all, we indict all of them, all that kind of stuff, change the whole intel on what's going on. We're doing radio intercepts. Intel community comes in. They're working with us because of my group in Houston, and we're doing intercepts all the way down to Guatemala and on the radio intercepts, and that's still ongoing. And then when I'm SOD for my 3 years, 2000 to 2003, we've got the DC sniper. That occurs while I'm there. And then 9/11. And so the Pentagon is right across 95 from DEA headquarters. And I wasn't in headquarters, I was in offsite. But all the bosses that I was friends with, the administrator and all that, they were sitting on the 12th floor having a meeting when the plane went into the Pentagon. And so that always had being there when that happened, always stuck. So boom, I'm in Houston, and an opening in Kabul country office comes open for doing the wiretaps. And that's what I did. My whole career with DEA was I did wiretaps, complex conspiracy investigations. And so I put in for it. I get it right away. And so I go to Afghanistan. So the first 9 months, I don't take any leave. And you're supposed to take leave every 3 months because you're in a war zone and all this kind of stuff. We had free drive, and we were working nonstop with, it started off with the Norwegians, the FSK, and then their special forces, and then the Aussies, Kiwis came in. We worked with the Kiwis, and then the Aussies came in. Then the Norwegians came back in, and we were in multiple troops in contact, and we were going nonstop. And there was a lot of kidnapping, like the Man on Fire movie about Mexico. That's all based on true story. But the same thing was going on in Afghanistan. They were kidnapping rich Afghan families, kids, holding them for ransom, cutting off ears, cutting off fingers. And we were going out with the MOI, the Ministry of Interior, and catching these guys. And we had an 82 to 84% success rate. And it was driving the intel community crazy because they couldn't figure out how we were doing it and being so successful. And it was from my training in Dallas doing the wiretaps and using the swamp box and using triggerfish and tracking phones, and I knew how to do it, and I applied it in Afghanistan. It worked perfect, and we had different equipment, but it's the same principle, and we were killing it. And so let's just to add that, one funny story was we were in Musai province, which is, it's, what is this? Province, district, Musai district, which is a southern district in the Kabul province. We were looking for guys that were hiring and coordinating and recruiting suicide bombers, and basically they go out and find mentally challenged kids and or adults, or they kidnap families and force them to do the suicide stuff. And this guy was very successful. So anyway, we're out with the Norwegians, and we're looking for this guy using equipment I can't talk about. And the first night, we had to borrow night vision from the Norwegians because DEA didn't have any. And so we're driving around middle of the night, and we go all around this mountain, this Sugar Hill, and we're getting hits and on the equipment. We didn't nail it down. So we get back to compound, and Norwegian guys, and these are all FSK, and Drew probably knows a lot more about them, but they're very good. They're very well respected as far as special forces guys. And they're like, wow, you guys did good. How long y'all been, driving with knives and stuff? And this is our first night. And they go, oh, tomorrow we're driving. Next night we're out driving around. They run off the road into a creek bed, and we're stranded, and all hell breaks loose. And so we're in troops in contact for it's a few hours, and then it quieted down, but we didn't get out of there until 11 hours later. And then come to another one. Our guys were up on the hill, same location a couple months later, looking for the same bad guy because he left town while we were looking for him first time. He was back. We're driving, and they're up on the side of a mountain with the equipment, and we're driving in to bring them up supplies after midnight, and we drive into an L ambush. I'm in the lead vehicle, and I've got a Norwegian that's with me, and then I've got an equipment operator in the back, and we somehow avoid 4 RPGs, and then a PKM, obviously is on a tripod, but the tracers are coming right at us. We're all blacked out, and for whatever reason, as it gets right to the hood of the car, it drops down and goes, and it's hitting the caliche and everything on the side of the road. Everything's splattering up. Then they raise it up at the tail of my vehicle, and it was an up-armored Toyota Land Cruiser, which basically it had 2-inch thick windows. It was done in Dubai. It had phone books in the doors, and it wasn't real, so thank goodness. But it went, and then all hell broke loose on the guys behind us, and they all backed up. So we were stranded out there for another bunch of hours, and just 3 of us, and then the Norwegians came in force, and got us out of there. But so that's my DEA time. And during that second ambush, we were stacking big rocks up to hide behind because there was firing going on everywhere. And I get a really bad lower abdomen hernia. And so I go to the doctors and, are you sure you got your hernia? You know, you didn't already have this. And so that gets me aggravated. So, and this is over in Afghanistan. And we had an unbelievable physical before we went over there. I mean, where they checked you for everything and then shot you up full of everything. And so anyway, I was coming back for an award in Denver, and it was for Parade Magazine. And I called John Elway, who had always stayed close contact, and, hey, can I see the Bronco doctors? Because I got a hernia and I want to get it fixed by good doctors. And it had been over a year since this had happened. And he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, absolutely. I'll have it all set. And when you come, he goes, you got to come over to the house for dinner. He goes, because I want to talk to you about something. So I come back, go to the awards thing, and then I go to the doctors, and they fix my hernia, and they had to put the mesh in there. You know, it wasn't a scope. It was, they had to cut me and all that kind of, and fix it up. And he goes, no, you don't go back for like 10 days, 2 weeks, because it's dirty over there. Yes, sir. So I go over to John's house, and sitting there, and it's his wife's in the kitchen, and John and I are sitting on the couches in his living room and den, and he pulls out the Blue Label, and he pours a glass. Pours me a glass. We sit there and toast. He goes, okay, here's what I want to talk to you about, Bish. He goes, I want you to come back and be my head of security for the Broncos. And I just told my wife, second wife, because I'd gone through a divorce years before, and told my second wife, you know, she's Thai, that once I got through with DEA, which I was coming to that age where I was going to be done with DEA, I'd be working with a contracting firm who was an old 160th guy that ran the company, and job for life. But I would live in Thailand, travel all over the world, doing the contracting stuff. And now John's saying move back to the U.S., and I'd already told her parents, you know, daughter's going to be living in Thailand. And I go, well, you know, John, can I have time to think about this? And I went through what I just told you guys. He goes, sure. And so we had a couple more sips. He goes, Bish. I go, yeah. And he goes, what did you decide? And I go, all right, young people, window opens, window shuts. I mean, if I hadn't taken the job. And I had my 20 years in, and John knew that. So I had my 20 years in with the government. And so I fly back and tell my wife, tell my in-laws she's going to the U.S. And then I asked her to ask her father respectfully. He doesn't speak English. And so she's kneeling in front of her father and doing the Thai respect. And she says, and then he answers, and I don't have a clue. And I go, D, what'd he say? He goes, wife goes with the husband. And so the rest is history. I came back. That was February of 2012. And I'm now going into my 13th year as the Vice President of Security for the Broncos. And it's been a blessing. And I know we're going to open it up for questions. So there's a lot of stuff I can answer about the new ownership and all that. But as far as getting into players and I will say, well, I can't talk about that. But anything y'all want to ask. But I hope you young guys got out of this rambling that during your lives, you're going to interact with different people. They're going to have unbelievable influences in your life. Hopefully you'll recognize that. But, and I wanted to kind of go through one last thing before it's kind of like a little chit list just to think about. And it's like, you know, ask yourself, who do you work with? Who do you hang out with? Are you a loyal person? Are your friends loyal? Do you have good manners? Are you polite? Do you show old school respect for females? Holding the door, you guys. Holding the door, opening the door, allowing them to go first. How do you treat people? What persona do you display to others? Your perceived persona or the factual persona that you show to others? Are you honest, truthful, respectful, considerate, kind? How do you treat animals? How do you treat your parents and your parents' friends? Are you alert? Do you have your face in your phone nonstop? Do you complete your chores? What's expected of you? Your assignments, your tasks? Do you take time to relax? Do you control what you put in your body? Are you constructive in your praise and criticism of others and their actions around you? Are you guarded in a healthy manner? Do you know when to keep your mouth shut? Now reverse all these with how your friends treat you and act around you when they're doing things. And make a decision. If there's something emotional that's causing your friends to act in a certain way, help them with that if you can. Sometimes you can't stick your nose into other people's business. But if there's no emotional strain that they're going through and they're just acting in different manners than these, separate yourself from them. And that's what I've done my whole life. I've made plenty of mistakes. I've made plenty of stupid decisions and things I still regret. But I'm pretty comfortable with my life right now. I've been blessed. I got 10 years of playing professional football, 20 years, 2 months working for the government. I've got NFL player retirement. I've got NFL or government retirement. Now I'm into NFL again in another retirement building. And I like to work. And you young people, everything's kind of getting taken away because of the minimum wage, and all these jobs are disappearing because you can't get a job in the off season or your downtime because of the minimum wage killing things. Hopefully things are going to turn and settle and get better. But I just wanted to leave y'all with that a little kind of check thing on how you're acting. And if you are, or you're trying to be the best person you can be. Because that was the whole thing while I was in Afghanistan. I had 200 linguists, Afghan linguists under me. I had a CIA guy that quit the CIA and came and was DEA. He hit me this afternoon when I was driving down here because he's trying to get a job with the Ohio State Police as a commander of their intel. Just wonderful people that you're going to interact with. And I'm going to shut up because I'll just keep going. So,
Keith Bishop, first of all, just a remarkable story. Thank you for sharing this with us. So we'd like to take a couple of questions, and you get to be on video. So that means come back here to the microphone if you have any questions. We will ask those. I'm going to start with one. Being the captain of the Denver Broncos all those years, with the things that you were going through in your own career, but also bringing all these different guys together from different backgrounds with different things going on, what was that like?
It was, I didn't campaign to be a captain. I was, you'd have secret ballot and the team would vote and the equipment manager would tally the votes and then tell coach, who the team captains were. And I was fortunate enough to be elected. I was elected, I believe, because of the way I treated my teammates, all of them, equal on the field. If anybody messed with any one of my teammates, I was the first person there to defend them. I stayed out of any of the politics stuff. I didn't let certain players pick on younger players, which happened, but I can't go into detail because it's not right. But it's you lead by example, and I think just doing the best you can, not talking bad, but listening and letting people vent. And I think leaders are kind of self-made, but it's a very tricky self-made endeavor. If you're trying to be the leader, if you're trying to be that guy, most likely you're going to screw it up and you're going to have a bunch of people against you. So it's like just be yourself and be helpful and contribute what you can. And if you have more ability to contribute, then that'll kind of take care of itself and it will be recognized by your friends and your peers.
And last question. You are the newest board member here at the Center for American Values, and this is a special place. What would you like to say about the center?
It's very humbling. Like I said, my father was in the military, and Vietnam was just ending when I was a senior in high school in 1975. I was wanting to volunteer. West Point was one of those teams or schools that was after me, except because of my grades. I'd had to gone to one of those preparatory schools for a year before, if I'd made that decision. But my father was like, no, you're not going in the military. And that was just because of the politics at the time. And so fast forward, I've always had phenomenal respect for the armed services. And that's the way I was brought up. And spending 38 months in Afghanistan, I didn't go into Marja, which in 2009 or 2010, February 2010, going into Marja, we sent our informants in, and General Larry Nicholson, who was the Lieutenant General of the Marines, we had a briefing in his office, and I remember the intel community officer that was there when we gave our initial report, because we had two informants, the DEA informants that we called the Mercs, and they were Taliban, and but they were phenomenal. They saved a lot of our troops' lives. But anyway, we sent them in, and like 2 months before, and they came out after a couple of weeks, and so we had a follow-up meeting with General Nicholson, and I think it was Killen was the colonel. Killen. I wish I could remember, but he was his number two, and then we had the other people in the room. We had the intel community person in the room. And I remember we gave a brief report. I did, and the intel community guy, he said, "I've been running 512 sources for the last 6 months," and he goes, "I haven't got any of this reporting." And General Nicholson said, "Keith, come with me." So we stand up, leave the table. He takes me back into his hooch, and he gives me his coin, and he goes, "I think we brought you guys in too late." And I go, "No, sir." I go, "We have our informants coming in. They're going to do a full debrief. I want one of your Marine intel persons to accompany us to Kabul for for the debrief. He was like, "You're going to let us sit in on the debrief of your informants?" I go, "Absolutely." And then we'll put it together, we'll get back. And then this is 2 months before the entry into Marja. I think it was Operation Mushtarik, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I go, furthermore, we'll have each one of these informants will ride in a vehicle with one of our case agents at the lead of your force groups going in to Marja, because they had it completely rigged for booby trap, to show your personnel where the booby traps and everything are. And anyway, they go up and we bring their lieutenant up to sit in on debriefs with us. We're in a safe house in Kabul, and we go through everything, and we're DEA, so we have individual printouts of Google Maps of Marja that we have to all stick together. So it's all, and the informants are on their knees with markers, putting where they've got the dishka set up for when the vehicles are approaching, where they've got the rockets, the 106, I think it was 106s, were in tubes in the intersections, all aimed in. They had hanging explosive to blow down in the top of the MRAPs. And they had the schoolhouse in Marja completely rigged with explosives, because that was what was going to be used as the command center once the military or body went in there. And that's when General Nicholson asked me to go in with him. And I said, our guys will be right in there with you. And then the latest thing that we hit them with was there'll be a guy on a motorcycle that's going to drive up, and it's going to be full of explosives, and he's going to try to take out the command vehicles, when that's happening. And then I remember Colonel Killen hit me up, and he goes, stuff was spot on. And then if you pull up Marja on the internet, because I did before I came, because I was going to talk about it more. But anyway, if you pull it up, it goes through all this stuff. And they talk about the snipers. And those were Chechen snipers that our informants provided information on. And they said they're going to wait for you guys to open up the MRAPs, start your line coming out, and they're going to be headshots, as you guys, and they're Chechen, they were respected snipers. And sure enough, that did happen a few times, but not as many as probably would have happened. But it was this and what these and Drew have done. I mean, it's, I was over there in the periphery, but I experienced what war. I mean, I was in 3 ticks, or troops in combat, and but I had a bunch of the top professionals around me when that happened, and those guys are still my dearest friends, whether it's Australian SASR or the Norwegian FSK. We didn't do a lot with the U.S. military. We provided a lot of information to Soft Sea, and we ambushed the ambushers many, many, many times with the 10th group, providing them information. And but this is very humbling, and it's an honor.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I made a mess.
We'll figure all that out. Remarkable story of a little kid from Midland, Texas. In America, anything is possible. And that's why what's happening here at the center is so important. Drew, would you like to say anything before I do the final remarks?
Just one thing. Really appreciate, Keith, your words. Welcome you on our board for a couple reasons. One is your personal character. and you're well-rounded, and it looks like someone told you how to think, but not what to think. And just like every one of these men on the wall here, they were never told what to do, but they were given the background to make the right decision when it counts. And the other part is your relationship to law enforcement is something that we're embracing now because while every one of these men here and the others that aren't pictured here fought out of country for things that represented our country. But right now we have issue in the United States. Whether you've heard it, know it or not, we're in big trouble as far as the appreciation for law enforcement. And where we're going with that, I don't know. But what we've got to do is start making a move to recognize those that choose law enforcement. Henry Jones is on our board as a former Denver police officer. We got Ruben over there as a former police chief of Pueblo, and maybe some others here. But the point is we've got to get behind the effort to let these young folks and their parents know that they can do the right thing, that no one needs to tell them what to do. It's just we've got the country here that we're proud of, and let's show it that we're proud of, and we want to preserve it. And that's what the center is doing right here, is preserving it. One final thing is driving here. One of the people that are allowing us to do this is Gary Sinise. Everybody probably knows who Gary Sinise is. And his son just passed. Had a long battle with a very rare, incurable cancer, and he finally passed. But just coming here, he sent a note to me to make sure I knew that he passed. And he also sent a copy of an article that he wrote, because he never gives up. And he mentions three things. One was the Center for American Values. So keep that in mind. We owe it to a lot of people to keep going and doing all we can. And thanks, Keith, for your fine words. And those listening, just remember that there's opportunity out there. And he left an NFL where I think a lot of folks would say, man, I want to stay in that. That's big. Everybody knows me. But he did what his passion was. That's the kind of guy he is. So all of you, especially the young ones, get out there, do what you believe in doing. The older ones like us, we got to do the same thing. If we believe in what we're doing, let's do it and do it as hard as we can because it's all worth it. Thank you.